Συζητήσαμε και με τον Στίβεν Ερλάνγκερ, τον επικεφαλής διπλωματικό ανταποκριτή των New York Times, πριν από λίγες ώρες. Μιλήσαμε μέσω Skype μαζί του. Ας δούμε τι μας είπε. Stephen, thank you very much for being with the National Greek Television. How would you describe the U.S. policy towards Turkey in the last months, especially after the Russian invasion into Ukraine?
I would say it's ambivalent, it's unhappy, it's realistic. All those things. Everyone knows Mr. Erdogan is a very difficult character to deal with. He changes his mind, he speaks, he makes demands that are sometimes real, sometimes not real. But at the same time, there's a recognition that he has been playing Turkey's influence cleverly, and that he has played this balancing role, this intermediary role between Moscow and NATO, which somebody has to do. And so he has basically established himself as an important channel, particularly for the future, if there is a future set of talks, because he can talk to the Ukrainians and talk to the Russians, and there aren't that many other people who can do that. Mm-hmm. So everybody gets annoyed with him. Washington's very annoyed with him over his objections to Sweden and Finland, which seem to change every minute. And, you know, obviously they're holding back on F-16 sales and upgrades. But now I think everyone thinks we have to wait to see what happens in the Turkish elections, which are coming quite soon. I mean, maybe as early as May.
Right. Before we get into the elections, is the entrance of Sweden and Finland into NATO of such a great importance to the US that in the end they could barter it with the F-16 upgrade?
Well, I think there is a quiet bargaining that's been going on for months now, to be honest. It's not explicit, partly because Congress is in control of those arms sales. But there's no question, you know, there are quid pro quos going on. There are discussions about Syria, lots of discussions with, as you know, a very professional Turkish foreign ministry. People around Mr. Erdogan are also very professional and are used to dealing with Washington. The problem is Congress has lost a lot of its sympathy for Turkey, and so it's a hard promise to make. But I do think this is a negotiation that to some degree will hinge on what Turkey does. At this point, it looks like, despite everyone's efforts, the Turkish vote in the parliament on Sweden and Finland won't come until after the Turkish elections, ideally before the next big NATO summit meeting in Vilnius, which I believe is in July.
So you sense that the US officials are waiting to see whether Erdogan will get re-elected in May to somehow retain their diplomatic capital, meaning they will wait to see who they will have to deal with?
Well, they'd like to get it done now, and they will certainly deal with Erdogan, there's no question. And despite the opinion polls, I think you'd have to be very careful about betting against Erdogan. You know, I mean, he's won a lot of elections. He may lose his majority in the parliament, which is interesting, but if he's prepared to take his main political opponents and get them into all kinds of legal troubles over old statements, it's just a sign that, you know, he certainly isn't setting out to lose this election.
Now, in Greece, we know the important role of Senator Menendez plays in vetoing the deal. And Turkish officials have been targeting him lately. But we also see a bipartisan approach of stopping Turkey from obtaining the jets. I mean, this is not really a one-man show, do you think?
No, I agree with you. I think Congress is not happy with Mr. Erdogan, and they understand the need to withhold the sugar until something gets done. At the same time, I mean, it should be said that for NATO, for all its allies, Turkey, you know, remains a very crucial part of Western defense, Black Sea. I mean, it's a bit the way people talk about Russia. It's there, it's always going to be there, and you have to deal with it. And so that means dealing with Mr. Erdogan. So yes, there's a lot of bipartisan unhappiness in Congress, but they're also waiting for a real signal from the White House about what should happen. And I think that will depend on Sweden, Finland, and naturally that now seems that it will depend on the Turkish elections.
Finally, there's a widespread argument that says that the US doesn't want to lose Turkey, but at the same time, they want to give, say, to Greece, for example, some airspace power that could stop Turkey from expanding its role and activities in the region. Do you agree on that?
Well, I haven't reported that out. I mean, that sounds plausible. I think Greece has made a lot of friends in Washington. Greece has been improving its own defense spending, it plays rightly on everyone's fatigue with Erdogan's demands. I think there is a little sympathy, to be honest, in Congress for some of Turkey's unhappiness over rights to sea exploration. Greece claims huge amounts of the sea right off the Turkish coast just because of a couple little islands. And, but the law of the sea is such as it is. But I mean, there is some sympathy for Turkey there, but at the same time, people urge Greece to be reasonable as well, because the last thing anyone wants is another Greek-Turkish conflict. I mean, that's, inside NATO. In the run-up to the election, people worry about it, right? Because Erdogan has said, if I remember the quote right, we will come one night, and people want that night not to come.